When the system labeled me just another orphan, they tried to take the only family I had left, my parents' retired German Shepherd K9. They said he was too dangerous, too broken, just like me. But hidden inside an old wooden box they left behind was a map that pointed to a forgotten pyramid buried beneath the Egyptian desert. And what Rex and I found inside wasn't gold. It wasn't treasure. It was the truth about my parents' death. It was proof they never stopped fighting for me. And it was the key to a life no one thought I deserved. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, if the world tried to decide your ending before you even had a chance to begin, then stay with me. Because this story isn't just about a hidden pyramid. It's about finding your way out of the dark. And discovering that sometimes your greatest treasure is the strength you didn't know you had. Early March in Colorado Springs carried a brittle kind of cold. The wind came down from the Rockies sharp and restless, scraping along the rows of low government buildings on the east side of the city. Snow still clung to the shadows, gray at the edges, half melted and stubborn. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that felt too big for the world beneath it. Inside the Elm Ridge Youth Transitional Center, the air smelled faintly of bleach and overcooked pasta. Emma Carter sat on the narrow metal bed assigned to her, hands folded in her lap, back straight as if posture alone could hold her together. Emma was 16, but grief had carved subtle years into her expression. She was tall for her age, almost 5'8", with long, dark blonde hair she usually tied back in a low, practical ponytail. Her eyes were a striking gray blue, watchful and analytical, the kind that noticed small details others missed. She had inherited her father's sharp cheekbones and her mother's steady gaze. There was nothing soft about her posture. She moved carefully, deliberately, like someone used to bracing for impact. Before the accident, Emma had grown up between excavation sites and university lecture halls. Her parents, Dr. Jonathan Carter and Dr. Amelia Carter, were respected American archaeologists specializing in Old Kingdom Egypt. They had spent years working near Dashur, studying lesser-known pyramid complexes. Emma had grown up reading field notes the way other kids read fairy tales. Then, 3 months ago, a structural collapse inside an unstable chamber had buried them both. That was the official version. Emma hadn't cried in public. She had listened to the condolences. She had signed the forms. She had answered the police questions in a voice so calm it unsettled the detective. And then she had been transferred to Colorado's foster system because there were no immediate relatives willing or able to take her in, all except one living being who had refused to leave her side. Rex lay at her feet now. Rex was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, bred from a K9 working line but retired early due to a minor hip injury that made him unsuitable for active police service. He was large even for his breed, 85 pounds of dense muscle and disciplined stillness. His coat was a deep saddle black over rich tan, his muzzle flecked with early gray. One ear stood tall while the other carried a faint notch from an old training accident. His amber eyes rarely stopped moving. He had been trained for scent detection and protection. He responded to both English and German commands, but with Emma he needed none. He seemed to read the shift of her breathing, the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her fingers. When the state tried to place Emma, Rex had nearly been separated from her. Regulations, they'd said. Liability, they'd said. But Emma had refused placement unless Rex came too. The compromise had been temporary housing at Elm Ridge, pending evaluation. Across the room, 3 other girls occupied their beds. The loudest among them was Brianna Cole, a stocky 17-year-old with dyed burgundy hair and sharp, restless eyes. Brianna had grown up in and out of the system, her sarcasm honed into armor. She had a quick temper and a quicker instinct to establish dominance. Next to her was Tasha Nguyen, small and wiry, perpetually chewing gum, observant but rarely initiating conflict. The third was Maribel Santos, quiet and withdrawn, usually buried in a paperback romance novel. Brianna leaned back against the wall and smirked at Emma. "So the desert princess doesn't talk much, huh?" Emma didn't answer. Rex's head lifted slightly. Brianna's smirk widened. "Careful. Your wolf's staring at me." "He's not a wolf," Emma said evenly. "He's retired K9. Whatever. Still looks like he'd bite." Rex didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply watched. That unsettled Brianna more than a snarl would have. Over the next week, the tension sharpened. Brianna began hiding Emma's toiletries, accidentally knocking over her belongings, muttering comments about rich kid orphan under her breath. She resented Emma's composure. It felt like arrogance. One evening, as Emma returned from a required counseling session, she found her sketchbook, one of the few personal items she had left, torn along the spine. Rex was already standing between Brianna and the bed. He didn't bark. He simply planted himself there, muscles taut, eyes locked. Brianna froze. "Call him off," she snapped. "He hasn't done anything," Emma replied quietly. Staff arrived seconds later, drawn by the raised voices. A report was filed. Words like aggressive posture and threat display appeared in the notes. 2 days later, Emma was called into the administrative office. Mrs. Holloway sat behind the desk. Margaret Holloway was in her late 40s, tall and slender, her posture impeccable. Her ash-brown hair was always pulled into a tight bun, and she wore wire-rimmed glasses that gave her a severe appearance. At first glance, she seemed rigid, another bureaucrat hardened by years in the system. But there was something else in her eyes, fatigue layered over stubborn compassion. Mrs. Holloway had started her career idealistic. After 22 years navigating neglect cases, custody battles, and state funding shortages, that idealism had evolved into pragmatism. Yet she had never fully lost her instinct to question when something didn't sit right. She folded her hands. "Emma, there have been multiple reports regarding Rex. He hasn't hurt anyone. He doesn't have to. Perceived threat is enough." Emma's jaw tightened. "He's the only family I have left." Mrs. Holloway studied her carefully. "I'm aware." There was a pause. "The state can rehome him temporarily," Mrs. Holloway said gently, "until your situation stabilizes." "No," Emma said immediately. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was absolute. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mrs. Holloway sighed. "I'll delay the recommendation, but you need to keep him under control at all times." "He is under control," Mrs. Holloway believed her. What she didn't say was that she had begun reviewing the accident file again the night before. Something about the excavation collapse bothered her. The safety reports were incomplete. The Egyptian site logs had missing timestamps. Funding disputes with the private antiquities foundation had been quietly settled weeks before the accident. The Carters had not been reckless researchers, and Emma did not behave like someone blindsided by tragedy. There was calculation in her silence. That night, back in the dormitory, Rex began pawing at something beneath Emma's bed. It wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. "Rex," she whispered. He nudged harder. Emma knelt and reached under the thin mattress platform. Her fingers brushed against rough wood. She pulled out a small, rectangular box, dark cedar, edges worn smooth with age. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen it since the day of the funeral. It had been shipped with her belongings, but forgotten in the chaos of intake processing. Rex sat back on his haunches, eyes fixed on it. The box smelled faintly of dust and desert sand. Emma lifted the lid. Inside lay folded parchment, brittle with age but carefully preserved. There was also a brass compass, its surface engraved with tiny hieroglyphic markings her father had once used in lectures. She unfolded the parchment slowly. It wasn't a museum replica. It was a hand-drawn map. At the top corner, in her mother's precise handwriting, "For Emma, when you are ready." Her throat tightened. The map depicted a section of desert terrain southwest of Cairo. A pyramid was marked, not one of the famous tourist sites, but a lesser-known structure near Dashur. There were annotations in both English and Arabic, symbols she recognized from her parents' research on burial chamber substructures. Rex shifted closer. "This is what you were trying to show me," she whispered. The dormitory noise faded into background static. The map wasn't treasure in the childish sense. It was a continuation, a thread. Outside, the wind rattled the building windows. Across the hall, Brianna laughed at something on her phone. In the administrative office, Mrs. Holloway closed Emma's accident file and stared at the ceiling. And in her narrow bed, under fluorescent lights and institutional ceilings, Emma Carter realized her parents hadn't left her empty-handed. They had left her a direction, and she traced the pyramid symbol with her fingertip. "I'm ready," she whispered. Rex rested his head on her knee. And somewhere far beyond Colorado's frozen horizon, beneath sand older than memory, something waited. Emma did not sleep that night. The fluorescent lights dimmed at 11, but the map beneath her blanket glowed brighter in her mind than any overhead bulb. Rex lay pressed against her legs, warm and steady, his breathing slow but never fully relaxed. Every time someone shifted in their bunk, one of his ears twitched. By morning, Colorado's sky had turned iron gray. Snow threatened again. Emma waited until afternoon study hour to examine the parchment properly. The Elmridge common room held 6 outdated desktop computers, their plastic casings yellowed with age. The Wi-Fi signal flickered unpredictably, but it was enough. She scanned the map into the system using the old flatbed scanner, adjusting the brightness so the faded ink sharpened into clearer contrast. Lines that had looked decorative now appeared deliberate angles. Distance markings, ratios. Her father had once taught her how Egyptian architects embedded geometry into everything they built. Nothing the ancients did was random, he used to say. If it looks symbolic, it's probably structural. Emma enlarged the upper right quadrant. There, faint but unmistakable, was a red marking over a pyramid outline. Not a tourist site, not Giza, not Saqqara, Dashur, more precisely, southwest of the bent pyramid, farther than the usual excavation grids. She cross-referenced coordinates from academic archives. The numbers hidden in the map's border matched a survey grid used 15 years ago, before satellite scans became standard. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just sentimental, it was precise. Rex shifted beside her chair and let out a low, almost inaudible huff. Emma glanced toward the entrance of the common room. A man stood just outside the glass door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, mid-30s perhaps. His dark jacket was too formal for a casual visit, and though he pretended to look at his phone, his posture was alert, observant. His hair was close-cropped, military neat. A faint scar traced along his jawline. When their eyes met, he looked away too quickly. Rex rose to his feet silently. Emma minimized the file. The man moved on, disappearing down the hallway. "Easy," she whispered, but Rex remained standing for a full minute after the figure vanished. Later that evening, Emma requested supervised phone access. Mrs. Holloway raised a brow but granted 15 minutes. Emma dialed a number she had memorized years ago. Dr. Samuel Reed answered on the 4th ring. Samuel Reed was 52, lean and slightly stooped from years bent over excavation trenches. His sandy hair had thinned at the temples, and he wore wire-framed glasses perpetually smudged with dust. His face carried a permanent expression of distracted intelligence, and as though half his thoughts were cataloging artifacts while the other half processed human emotion. He had been her parents' closest colleague. "Emma?" His voice carried both surprise and restrained relief. "I wasn't sure they'd let you call." "They didn't, not really." A pause. "I found something," she said. There was a subtle shift in his breathing. "What kind of something?" "A map. From them." Silence stretched long enough to become heavy. "Describe it." She did. The red marking, the geometric ratios, the symbol of a lock etched near the pyramid's northern face. Dr. Reed exhaled slowly. "I wondered when you'd find it." "You knew?" "I suspected they left contingencies." "Contingencies for what?" "For being right." Emma gripped the phone tighter. "Right about what?" There was a hesitation she had never heard from him before. "Your parents believed they had identified a sealed chamber beneath that pyramid," he said carefully. "Not a burial chamber, something older. Something intentionally hidden during a later dynastic revision." "Treasure?" she asked. "Not in the way collectors mean it," Reed replied. "Knowledge, records, evidence of a transitional civilization period that would rewrite parts of Egyptian chronology." Emma's throat tightened. "Why wasn't it published?" "Because," Reed said quietly, "they started receiving pressure, funding threats, access restrictions." "From who?" Another pause. "There are private foundations that prefer certain discoveries remain theoretical," he said. "It keeps artifacts valuable." Emma thought of the man outside the common room. "They died in a collapse," she said. "Yes," Reed answered. But it didn't sound like agreement. Before she could press further, Mrs. Holloway signaled that her time was nearly up. "Emma," Reed said quickly, voice lowering, "if that map includes the Red Seal, you need to be cautious. That marking wasn't only for you, it was a warning." The line disconnected. That night, Mrs. Holloway remained in her office long after staff hours ended. Files spread across her desk formed a quiet accusation. She had requested full documentation of the Carter excavation collapse. What she received was incomplete, timestamp gaps, equipment inspection reports filed retroactively, a security contractor's name blacked out entirely. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. In 22 years, she had seen bureaucratic laziness. This was not laziness. This was deliberate omission. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Manhattan, Victor Kane reviewed a notification on his encrypted laptop. Victor Kane was 48, impeccably dressed even in private. His salt and pepper hair was styled with surgical precision, and his tailored suits fit as though sewn directly onto his lean frame. His eyes were pale gray, almost colorless, and rarely betrayed emotion. He collected antiquities the way others collected stock portfolios strategically, aggressively, quietly. He did not see himself as a villain. He saw himself as a curator of civilization. An automated keyword alert had flagged an email exchange referencing Dosher Grid, Red Seal, and Reed. Kane leaned back in his leather chair. "So," he murmured, "the child found it." He closed the laptop with deliberate calm and picked up his phone. "Track any outbound communications from Reed," he instructed, "and confirm whether the Carter girl remains in Colorado." Back at Elmridge, the sense of being watched intensified. Rex detected it first. 3 evenings later, during mandatory outdoor recreation time, Emma felt it too, a weight in the air. The yard was enclosed by a chain-link fence topped with angled extensions. Snow had melted into slush along the perimeter. Brianna and 2 others sat near the bleachers, whispering. Rex stiffened, his nose lifted. There beyond the fence line, near the row of parked vehicles, stood the same tall man from before. This time he did not pretend to text. He simply observed. Rex emitted a low growl, deep and resonant. Staff turned. The man walked away immediately. "Control your dog," a counselor snapped. "He's controlled," Emma said calmly. "He's alert." Mrs. Holloway, watching from the doorway, followed the man's retreating figure with narrowed eyes. Later that evening, she called a contact in state security oversight. "I need confirmation," she said, voice steady. "Has any private contractor been authorized to monitor a minor in my facility?" The answer came back negative. Emma returned to her room and unfolded the map again. Under a magnifying lens borrowed from the art room, she examined the red seal more closely. It was not ink alone. There was faint embossing, a symbol she recognized from her father's signet ring. A stylized ankh intertwined with a compass rose. She turned the parchment sideways. Numbers aligned along the margin began to form coordinates when rearranged according to ancient Egyptian cardinal orientation. South considered primary, not north, she recalculated. The pyramid marked in red was not simply a structure. It was offset from the main survey by exactly 3.7 degrees west, hidden in plain sight. Rex rested his chin on her desk. "We're not done," she whispered. Outside, wind rattled the windows again. In her office, Mrs. Holloway highlighted a line in the accident report. "Private consultant present on site." The name field was blank. In Manhattan, Victor Kane reviewed archived photographs of the Dosher region, eyes narrowing at one pyramid long dismissed as structurally insignificant. And in a dormitory room in Colorado, under fluorescent lights that hummed without mercy, Emma Carter folded the map carefully and slipped it back into its cedar box. The pyramid marked in red was real, and so was the danger circling it. The decision did not arrive in a burst of rebellion. It settled quietly inside Emma like a stone dropping to the bottom of deep water. By the time the sun rose pale and cold over Colorado Springs, she already knew she would leave. She waited 3 days. 3 days of careful observation, of memorizing staff rotations, of noting when the side gate was left unlocked during supply deliveries. Rex watched her constantly, reading the shift in her posture, the subtle tightening of resolve in her jaw. Emma withdrew the small insurance payout her parents had left in a trust account, funds intended for education and living expenses. It wasn't a fortune, just under $9,000, enough for airfare, temporary lodging, and little else. She packed lightly, 2 changes of clothes, the cedar box, a notebook, a portable charger, and the brass compass. Rex's documents, vaccination records, retired K-9 certification went into a waterproof folder. She had spent hours researching international travel requirements. It wasn't impossible, just complicated. The night she left, snow fell again, thin and dry, whispering against the windows. At 2:17 a.m., during a scheduled power system test that dimmed corridor lighting for exactly 12 minutes, Emma slipped from her bed. Rex followed without command. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and sleep. She avoided the main entrance and exited through the service corridor near the kitchen. The side gate, as predicted, was secured with a simple chain, not locked. By the time the system noticed her absence, she was already in a rideshare heading toward Denver International Airport. The driver was a middle-aged man named Carl Benson, broad-faced and permanently squinting as though bracing against invisible sunlight. He wore a Colorado Rockies baseball cap and spoke in steady, friendly bursts. "Big dog," Carl commented, glancing at Rex in the rearview mirror. "Retired K9, Emma said. Carl nodded with respect. "Good dogs, those. Loyal." Rex lay calmly across the back seat, head resting near Emma's knee, eyes scanning each passing headlight. The airport loomed like a white skeletal tent against the dawn sky. Emma's pulse steadied into something colder than fear focus. At the check-in counter, a young airline employee with dark curls and a badge reading Alicia Morales looked at Rex skeptically. Alicia was in her mid-20s, slender and sharp-featured, her professionalism layered over what seemed like natural empathy. "Service documentation?" Alicia asked. Emma handed over the certification papers. Alicia examined them carefully, then looked at Emma. "You traveling alone?" "Yes." A flicker of concern crossed Alicia's face, but she said nothing further. After a moment, she printed the boarding passes. "Gate C-27, she said quietly. "Safe travels." The flight to Cairo connected through JFK. The hours blurred into recycled cabin air and muted engine roar. Rex remained composed through turbulence, his training evident in the way he braced his paws against shifting vibrations. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Emma unfolded the map again beneath the dim overhead light. She traced the offset angle 3.7 degrees west and the embossed red seal. Her phone vibrated. A message from Dr. Samuel Reed. "I shouldn't be sending this electronically, but you need to know. Your parents received threats weeks before the collapse. Anonymous, demanding they halt excavation at Dashur. They refused. Be careful who you trust." Sr. Emma read the message twice, then deleted it. Hours later, Cairo appeared beneath the airplane window, a vast sprawl of sand-colored buildings stitched together by roads and the silver thread of the Nile. The air that hit her when she stepped outside the airport was warm, dry, and heavy with dust and diesel. Rex's nose lifted instantly, processing layers of unfamiliar scent. Cairo International Airport buzzed with layered languages and hurried movement. Emma navigated through customs with controlled calm. The officials glanced at her paperwork, at Rex's certification, and waved her through with bureaucratic indifference. Outside the terminal, a man approached holding a cardboard sign that read Carter. He was in his early 40s, lean and sun-browned, wearing a loose linen shirt and dark trousers. His hair was black, streaked with early gray at the temples. His eyes were sharp and observant, but not unkind. "Miss Emma Carter?" he asked in careful English. "Yes. I am Hassan El Amin. Dr. Reed contacted a colleague. I was asked to assist if you arrived." Hassan extended his hand. His grip was firm but measured. Hassan had once been a field archaeologist before bureaucratic restrictions limited his excavation licenses. He now worked as a licensed historical guide, supplementing income by discreetly assisting researchers navigating Egypt's complicated permit systems. Years of negotiating with officials had taught him patience layered over quiet defiance. "You should not be here alone," Hassan said gently as they moved toward his aging Toyota pickup. "But since you are, we proceed carefully." As they drove southwest toward Dashur, Cairo's dense chaos gave way to open desert. The city noise faded into wind sweeping across endless sand. In the distance, pyramids emerged, not as postcard icons, but as silent geometric scars on the horizon. Emma's breathing slowed. Rex shifted upright, alert. Hassan glanced at the dog. "He senses what you feel." He always does. They stopped short of the main tourist perimeter. Both the Red Pyramid stood massive and understated compared to its more famous cousins. Its limestone blocks glowed muted crimson under late afternoon light. Emma unfolded the map. "Not the main entrance," she said, scanning the terrain. "Offset west, 3.7 degrees. Hassan studied her with growing respect. You read topography? My father insisted. They walked along the desert edge, away from marked paths. Wind kicked up fine sand that scraped against boots and fur. The sun lowered, casting elongated shadows across the uneven ground. Rex halted suddenly, his posture shifted, focused, rigid. He lowered his nose to the sand and began circling a narrow depression partially concealed by drifted dunes. His paw scraped once, then again. "Rex," Emma whispered. Hassan knelt, brushing away sand with his hands. Beneath the surface, stone edges appeared, not natural rock, but cut blocks arranged in a subtle downward slope. "A ventilation shaft?" Hassan murmured. "No," Emma said softly. "An access tunnel." Rex dug more urgently now, sand spraying behind him in controlled bursts. Within minutes, the outline of a narrow descending passage became visible. Its entrance intentionally collapsed and buried. Hassan leaned back, astonished. This was never on official site records. Emma felt something shift inside her, not triumph, not yet, but confirmation. The map was real. Behind them, beyond the low ridge, a pair of binoculars lowered slowly. The man holding them was the same broad-shouldered observer from Colorado. His name was Daniel Mercer, a private security contractor formerly employed in artifact recovery operations, legal and otherwise. He had the build of a soldier and the patience of a hunter. He tapped his earpiece. "Visual confirmation. Target has located secondary structure near Red Pyramid, awaiting further instruction." Miles away, in a Manhattan office overlooking Central Park, Victor Kane listened. Do not intervene yet," Kane said calmly. "Observe." Back in Colorado Springs, Mrs. Holloway stood in Emma's empty dormitory room. The bed was neatly made. The cedar box was gone. She held Emma's intake file in one hand. "She planned this," she murmured. A junior staff member hovered nervously in the doorway. "Should we notify authorities?" Mrs. Holloway stared at the snow-covered yard outside. "Not yet," she said quietly. She had reviewed enough of the accident file to know Emma was chasing something deeper than grief. And something in her gut told her the girl wasn't running away. She was running toward the truth. In the fading Egyptian light, Emma knelt beside the partially uncovered entrance. The wind whispered over ancient stone. "We're here," she said to Rex. The tunnel descended into darkness. And for the first time since her parents' deaths, the direction before her was no longer theoretical. It was carved into the earth. The desert cooled quickly after sunset, but inside the partially uncovered tunnel, the air remained still and heavy. Fine grains of sand drifted down in slow whispers as Emma knelt at the entrance, fastening a small LED headlamp around her forehead. Rex stood beside her, muscles coiled but silent, his amber eyes reflecting the faint artificial light. Hassan hovered near the ridge, glancing uneasily toward the horizon. "We should not linger long," he warned softly. "If this structure is undocumented, others may already suspect." Emma nodded. "You don't have to come further." Hassan studied her for a moment. He saw the steadiness in her posture, the kind that didn't belong to a child. "I will remain near the entrance," he said, "but this path is yours." The passage sloped downward at a sharp angle. The walls were smoother than expected, yet the limestone blocks fitted with deliberate precision. Rex moved ahead carefully, paws finding purchase on the inclined stone. His body lowered instinctively, weight balanced for rapid response. The tunnel narrowed after 20 feet, then opened abruptly into a chamber that swallowed the light. Emma stepped inside. The room was not grand, no ornate carvings, no gilded sarcophagus. Instead, it was functional engineered with intention. Wooden crates lined one wall, their surfaces sealed with wax. Metal filing cabinets, modern, incongruous, stood against the far side. A portable generator rested in the corner beside a dust-covered laptop encased in protective casing. Emma's breath caught. "This isn't ancient," she whispered. Rex circled the perimeter, nose low, cataloging scents layered over time. Emma approached one of the crates and broke the wax seal carefully with her pocket knife. Inside were neatly stacked archival folders, each labeled in her mother's handwriting. Dates, coordinates, cross-references to obscure dynastic periods. She opened the top file. Photographs spilled out images of relief carvings far older than Old Kingdom inscriptions, symbols unfamiliar to mainstream Egyptology, transitional script bridging hieroglyphic evolution. Her hands trembled. This was it, the buried civilization theory her parents had hinted at but never published. She moved to the metal filing cabinet and opened the top drawer. Inside were copies of financial records, shipping manifests, correspondence between private antiquities brokers and a shell corporation named Eternum Holdings. Emma's pulse quickened. Attached to several emails was a familiar name, Victor Kane. She scanned quickly. References to artifact extraction, controlled site collapses, risk mitigation strategies. Her stomach dropped. The accident. Footsteps echoed faintly in the tunnel behind her. Rex's head snapped up, and a low growl vibrated through the chamber. Emma shut the cabinet drawer quietly and switched off her headlamp, plunging the room into darkness save for faint moonlight filtering through a narrow ventilation slit high above. Voices drifted down the tunnel. "Entry confirmed," said a man's voice, steady, controlled. Daniel Mercer stepped into the chamber first, headlamps sweeping across crates. He wore desert fatigues now, tactical harness fitted close to his torso. Behind him came two others, private security operatives with compact flashlights and suppressed firearms holstered at their hips. Mercer stopped when his light hit Emma. "Well," he said calmly, "that was faster than expected." Emma stood still. Rex positioned himself between her and the men. "You're trespassing on private research," Mercer continued. "Hand over the documents. And no one gets hurt." "They're not yours," Emma said evenly. Mercer's eyes flicked toward the open crate. "Ownership is negotiable." Behind him, another figure emerged from the tunnel, Victor Kane. Even in desert attire, he maintained immaculate composure. A tailored sand-colored jacket replaced his Manhattan suit, but his presence carried the same controlled authority. His pale gray eyes assessed the chamber with analytical interest rather than awe. "So this is what Jonathan died protecting," Kane said softly. Emma's breath sharpened. "You killed them," she said. Kane tilted his head slightly. "That's a dramatic oversimplification." Rex lunged. The movement was explosive, years of disciplined training unleashed in a fraction of a second. He collided with Mercer, knocking him sideways before the man could fully raise his arm. A gun clattered against stone. Chaos erupted in confined darkness. Emma grabbed the nearest folder stack and shoved it into her backpack while Rex grappled with Mercer, teeth bared, jaws snapping inches from flesh. One of the other operatives attempted to restrain the dog, but Rex pivoted, striking low at the man's leg and sending him crashing against the cabinet. "Stand down!" Kane snapped. But the narrow chamber worked against them. Flashlights swung wildly, beams colliding and scattering. In the confusion, a new voice echoed down the tunnel. "Enough!" Dr. Samuel Reed stepped into view, breathless, sand clinging to his trousers. He looked older than Emma remembered, exhaustion etched into his lined face, yet his eyes burned with fierce resolve. "You should not have come here, Victor," Reed said. Kane regarded him coolly. "Samuel, still chasing ghosts." "I protected this site for years," Reed replied. "Diverted funding inquiries, altered public reports. I thought keeping it hidden was safer." "For whom?" Kane asked. "For her," Reed said, nodding toward Emma. Rex maintained his defensive stance, body rigid, ready to strike again. Emma's gaze shifted between the men. "You knew," she said to Reed. "All this time." "Yes," Reed admitted. "Your parents entrusted me with coordinates. If anything happened, I was to ensure the data survived." Kane stepped forward slowly, hands open in a false gesture of peace. "Emma, listen carefully. These documents are volatile. Governments will intervene. Corporations will litigate. Your parents underestimated the ripple effect." "They underestimated you," she shot back. For a split second, something flickered in Kane's expression. Not guilt, not regret calculation. Mercer regained his footing and reached for his weapon. Rex reacted instantly, teeth clamping onto the man's forearm just hard enough to force release without severing flesh. Mercer cursed and stumbled backward. "Call them off!" one operative shouted. Kane raised a hand sharply. "Stand down!" Silence fell heavy in the chamber. Kane exhaled slowly. "You think exposure will bring justice. It will bring chaos." Emma tightened her grip on the folder strap. "Then let it." Reed stepped closer to her. The research includes full documentation artifact trafficking routes, shell accounts, bribery records, enough to dismantle Eternum. And implicate me, Kane added calmly. The weight of it settled in the room. Emma looked down at one final object resting atop a small steel case. A voice recorder. Old-fashioned. Analog. She pressed play. Static crackled, then her mother's voice filled the chamber. Steady, gentle. If you're hearing this, Emma, then we ran out of time. What we found beneath Dashur isn't treasure in gold. It's proof that history was rewritten intentionally, and some people will do anything to keep that rewriting intact. Her father's voice joined, lower, resolute. Truth isn't safe, but it matters. If you've reached this chamber, you're strong enough to choose what to do with it. Don't hide it. Don't sell it, use it. The recording ended. The silence afterward felt sacred. Kane regarded Emma one last time. You have no idea what storm you're inviting. Emma met his gaze without flinching. Neither did they. Rex stood at her side, breathing steady again, bloodless but fierce. Reed moved subtly between Emma and the others. It's over, Victor. Kane considered the narrow tunnel, the confined space, the unstable footing. He calculated odds, outcomes, optics. Then, surprisingly, he stepped back. This isn't finished, he said quietly. He turned and disappeared up the passage, Mercer and the others following reluctantly. When their footsteps faded completely, the chamber felt larger somehow. Emma exhaled slowly. The crates remained unopened beyond what she had touched, the filing cabinet still heavy with evidence, the recorder silent in her hand, no gold, no diamonds, just truth. And it was heavier than treasure. Rex leaned into her leg, grounding her. Reed looked at the documents scattered across the stone floor. They built this as an archive, he said softly. Not a vault. Emma nodded. The Chamber of Truth was no myth. It was real, and now it belonged to her. The desert was never truly silent. Even after Victor Kane's footsteps faded from the tunnel, wind moved across the dunes like a low, restless tide. Inside the chamber, the air felt charged, no longer ancient and still, but electric with consequence. Emma stood motionless for a moment, the recorder still in her hand. Her parents' final words lingered in the limestone walls. Rex remained pressed against her leg, alert but calmer now, his ears pivoting toward every faint sound above. Dr. Samuel Reed moved first. He crouched beside one of the metal cabinets and ran his hand across the files with reverence. "This is enough," he murmured. "Shipping manifests, wire transfers, excavation interference reports. They documented everything." Emma swallowed. "If it stays here, it dies here." Reed met her eyes. Then we don't let it stay here." She unzipped the steel case her father had stored beneath the crate. Inside, wrapped in foam, lay a compact satellite uplink transmitter, matte black, palm-sized, with foldable antenna fins. She remembered it vaguely from childhood field camps. Her father had called it insurance against censorship. "I thought it was just for emergencies," she said. "It is," Reed replied quietly. Emma powered it on. A small green light blinked to life. Signal strength fluctuated for several seconds before stabilizing. Reed looked toward the tunnel. "We won't have long." Outside, Daniel Mercer's boots crushed sand as he paced near the ridge, speaking into a secured phone. Victor Kane stood several yards away, posture relaxed but eyes sharp, watching the horizon rather than the pyramid. "He's sending something," Mercer said after checking a portable scanner. "Data burst signal." Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then we are out of time." Back inside the chamber, Emma connected the transmitter to the laptop found among her parents' equipment. The device hummed faintly as files began compressing into encrypted packets. "Where are you sending it?" Reed asked. "Everywhere," Emma replied. She had memorized email servers from academic institutions, investigative journalists, international antiquities task forces. She had also embedded a timed upload to an open-source archive platform designed for whistleblower disclosures. Progress bar. 37%. Rex suddenly stiffened again. Reed's eyes darted toward the tunnel. "They'll try to cut it off." Above ground, Kane stepped closer to the ridge, signaling Mercer. "Interfere without spectacle," he ordered. Mercer nodded and advanced toward the entrance with two operatives. Inside, the chamber lights flickered as the uplink adjusted power draw. Progress, 61%. Footsteps echoed down the tunnel once more. Emma did not turn around. Rex did. Yet the first operative reached the chamber threshold just as the progress bar hit 83%. He hesitated upon seeing Reed, then lunged toward the laptop. Rex intercepted. His movement was a blur, shoulder-first impact that drove the man sideways into the stone wall. The confined space amplified every collision. A flashlight shattered against the floor. "Stand down," Mercer shouted from behind. But Kane's earlier composure was gone. His patience had limits. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Progress, 94%. Another operative attempted to push past Rex, but the dog pivoted with disciplined precision, placing himself squarely between Emma and threat. Teeth bared, stance low, eyes unwavering. "Enough," Reed shouted. Progress, 100%. Transmission complete. The laptop screen flashed confirmation. Data successfully delivered. Emma exhaled. Outside, Kane's phone began vibrating almost immediately. He glanced down, then again, and again. Incoming notifications flooded the screen. Investigative reporters, international cultural heritage enforcement units, financial compliance authorities. Kane stared at Emma through the tunnel opening. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," he said quietly. Sirens wailed in the distance, not from the desert, but from the access road leading toward the restricted site perimeter. Reed stepped beside Emma. "I alerted Egyptian authorities when I realized Kane was here. Quietly." Hassan El Amin emerged from the ridge, breathless. "Local police and antiquities protection are on their way. I also contacted an Interpol liaison I once assisted." Within minutes, flashing lights broke across the sand like a second sunrise. Vehicles bearing the insignia of Egypt's tourism and antiquities police approached in a plume of dust. Leading the convoy was Captain Layla Farouk. Layla Farouk was in her late 30s, tall and commanding, her dark hair braided tightly beneath her cap. Her uniform was immaculate despite the desert wind, and her posture radiated disciplined authority. Years of confronting artifact smuggling rings had hardened her expression, but not her moral clarity. Her younger brother had once been injured during a black market excavation collapse, a fact that had cemented her resolve against traffickers. She stepped from her vehicle and surveyed the scene with cool assessment. "Victor Kane," she said evenly, "you will accompany us." Kane did not resist. He straightened his jacket and offered his wrists without struggle. "I assume you have compelling evidence," he said calmly. Layla held up a tablet displaying fragments of the data Emma had transmitted. Compelling enough. Mercer and the remaining operatives were restrained shortly after. Inside the chamber, Emma finally allowed her shoulders to sag slightly. Rex leaned into her, tail low but steady. By dawn, international news networks had begun broadcasting breaking updates. "Major antiquities trafficking ring exposed," read one headline. "Hidden Dashur archive reveals alleged corporate interference in archaeological research." Emma watched from the back seat of Layla's vehicle as reporters assembled beyond the restricted perimeter. Satellite vans dotted the desert edge. Her phone buzzed with unknown numbers. She ignored them. Back in Colorado, Mrs. Holloway stared at a television mounted in the Elmridge staff lounge. Footage of the Red Pyramid filled the screen. A reporter described a teenage American girl who had uncovered suppressed research and triggered an international investigation. Mrs. Holloway's eyes softened. A knock sounded at her office door. A tall man in a navy suit stepped inside. His name was Thomas Callahan, a representative from the U.S. State Department's Office of American Citizen Services. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed neatly back and a demeanor that blended bureaucratic caution with genuine concern. "Ms. Holloway," he said, extending his hand, "we need to coordinate retrieval of a minor currently in Egypt." She accepted his handshake. "She's not reckless," she said firmly. "She's determined." Callahan nodded. "That much is clear." By afternoon, headlines shifted tone. Teen whistleblower exposes artifact smuggling empire. Retired K9 credited with preventing violence during arrest. A still photograph circulated widely. Rex standing in the tunnel entrance, body angled protectively in front of Emma, teeth visible but eyes focused. Social media labeled him #K9 hero within hours. In Cairo, Emma stood near the secured site perimeter while officials cataloged materials from the chamber. Layla approached her with measured respect. "You understand this will take time," Layla said. "Investigations, court proceedings." Emma nodded. I'm not going anywhere. Layla's gaze shifted to Rex. Your dog prevented unnecessary bloodshed. He was trained to protect, Emma said quietly. And he did. A small media cluster approached cautiously. Flashbulbs popped, questions flew. Emma shielded her eyes. Reed stepped forward to intercept reporters, offering controlled statements about academic integrity and international cooperation. As evening settled, another convoy arrived, this one bearing diplomatic plates. Thomas Callahan stepped out first, followed by Mrs. Holloway. Emma froze for a split second when she saw her. Mrs. Holloway crossed the sand briskly, her bun slightly loosened by travel, but her composure intact. You always did plan ahead, she said softly. Emma swallowed. You didn't call the police. Mrs. Holloway's lips curved faintly. I trusted you had a reason. Callahan cleared his throat gently. We'll formalize guardianship and travel arrangements through proper channels. For now, your safety is priority. Emma glanced back at the pyramid one last time. The Chamber of Truth was sealed under official authority now. Its contents no longer hidden. Victor Kane was escorted into a transport vehicle under armed guard. As engines started and desert wind picked up again, Emma felt something unfamiliar beneath the weight of exhaustion. Relief. The storm above the sand had broken, and the truth had survived it. Colorado felt different when Emma returned. The mountains still cut sharp against the sky, and the air still carried that thin, pine-scented clarity, but she no longer felt small beneath it. The girl who had left in the middle of a snowstorm with a cedar box and a retired K9 had come back with something heavier than luggage. She had come back with proof. The legal aftermath of Victor Kane's arrest unfolded over months. Court proceedings stretched across jurisdictions: Egyptian antiquities law, international financial crime statutes, U.S. federal investigations. The evidence Emma had transmitted became central to dismantling Eternum Holdings and exposing its network of shell corporations. Several governments publicly acknowledged systemic failures in protecting archaeological sites. There were settlement agreements, and there were restitution funds. There were public apologies that felt rehearsed. Emma did not attend most of the hearings. She didn't need to. The truth had already spoken. Part of the financial recovery from the seized assets was directed into a restitution trust tied to the Carter excavation case. It was not framed as compensation for loss. No amount could cover that, but as support for preservation initiatives and academic transparency. Emma knew immediately what she would do with it. The Carter Legacy Foundation for Archaeological Integrity was registered 6 months after her return. Its mission statement was direct and unembellished: to protect cultural heritage through open research, ethical excavation, and public education. The small office space she leased in downtown Colorado Springs overlooked a modest stretch of city skyline framed by distant mountains. The building was older brick, renovated but not extravagant. She chose it deliberately. No marble floors, no glass towers. Just work. Mrs. Margaret Holloway signed the final adoption paperwork in a quiet courtroom with minimal ceremony. She wore a navy suit, hair still tightly secured in its usual bun, though a few silver strands had begun to show more prominently. Years of working within a strained system had carved permanent lines around her mouth, but that day her posture softened. When the judge asked Emma if this arrangement was voluntary, she answered without hesitation. Yes. Mrs. Holloway had never intended to adopt. Her life had been shaped by case files and institutional boundaries. A failed marriage early in her career had left her wary of personal entanglement. She had poured herself into policy and oversight instead of family. Emma changed that. You don't need saving, Mrs. Holloway had told her once. You need backing. It was the closest she came to saying I love you. Dr. Samuel Reed relocated part-time to Colorado the following spring, and he accepted a visiting research appointment at the University of Denver, his lectures drawing larger crowds than expected. His once cautious demeanor evolved into something steadierless, burdened by secrecy. He met Emma weekly at the foundation office, reviewing proposals, drafting ethical excavation guidelines, advising on grant partnerships. Where she carried fire, he carried structure. Where she moved forward quickly, he ensured stability beneath her steps. You don't just protect artifacts, Reed told her one afternoon as they sorted through correspondence. You protect process. Emma nodded, making notes. Rex lay stretched across the sunlit office floor, older now, his muzzle fully silvered. At 7 years old, he had slowed slightly but lost none of his vigilance. Children visiting the foundation often asked if he was the famous K9 hero. Emma always answered the same way. He was doing his job. But when she thought no one was looking, she would rest her hand against his neck and whisper gratitude. The Foundation's first public initiative was a museum exhibition hosted in partnership with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The exhibition was titled Beneath the Red Pyramid, Reclaiming a Buried History. Dr. Amina El Sayed curated the display on the Egyptian side. Amina was in her early 40s, tall and slender with expressive dark eyes that seemed to register both curiosity and skepticism in equal measure. She wore her hair in loose curls that framed a face marked by quiet intelligence. Having spent years fighting for greater representation of Egyptian scholars in Western-led excavations, she insisted the exhibition foreground collaboration over hero narratives. History does not belong to one nation, Amina said during planning sessions. It belongs to humanity. At the center of the exhibition, mounted inside a climate-controlled glass frame, hung the original map. The red-marked pyramid was clearly visible. Beside it were digital displays of the recovered research manuscripts, Emma's parents' notes detailing stratigraphy anomalies, architectural offsets, linguistic transitions that suggested a previously unacknowledged intermediary culture. Visitors moved slowly through the gallery. Some read every panel. Others simply stood before the map in silence. Media attention returned, though gentler now. Interviews focused less on scandal and more on preservation. Emma spoke carefully, choosing words the way her father once measured excavation grids. "I was told the system had no place for me," she said during one interview. "But systems are made by people, and people can change them." She did not speak with bitterness. She spoke with clarity. Back at the Foundation office, grant applications accumulated steadily. Young archaeologists sought funding for ethical digs. Whistleblower protections were integrated into all supported projects. Transparency became policy rather than slogan. Emma enrolled in university courses part-time, pursuing archaeology formally. In lecture halls, she was no longer simply the orphan from a headline. She was a student who asked precise questions about carbon dating margins and trade route diffusion. Rex accompanied her to campus on approved days, resting beneath her desk during seminars. Students who recognized him often asked for photos. He tolerated attention with patient dignity. One crisp autumn evening, nearly 2 years after the events in Dashur, Emma stood at the edge of the Great Sand Dunes National Park in southern Colorado. The dunes rose in smooth, shifting waves against a twilight sky streaked with rose and indigo. Wind sculpted the ridges into patterns that would vanish by morning. Rex stood beside her, paws planted firmly in the cool sand. This was not Egypt. But sand was sand. She closed her eyes and inhaled. Mrs. Holloway waited near the parked car, giving her space. Reed had remained in Denver that weekend, drafting a proposal for a joint excavation initiative between American and Egyptian universities. Emma stepped forward onto the dune slope. The sand shifted beneath her boots, sliding with each step. Rex climbed alongside her, slower now but determined, his body leaning into the incline. At the crest, they paused. The landscape stretched endlessly, no pyramids, no hidden chambers, just open horizon and wind. She knelt and pressed her palm into the sand. Treasure, she had once thought, meant something buried, something hidden, something rare. Now she understood differently. Treasure was the research preserved, the corruption exposed, the students funded, the sites protected. Treasure was Mrs. Holloway's steady presence in the courtroom, Reed's mentorship, Hassan's quiet assistance across an ocean, Layla's uncompromising enforcement. Treasure was a retired German shepherd who never left her side. She scratched behind Rex's ear. "You were right," she murmured. He leaned gently into her touch. The desert wind carried no sirens this time, no pursuit, no secrecy, only possibility. Emma rose and looked toward the fading light. She was no longer the girl the system forgot. She was the guardian of a legacy, an archaeologist in her own right, a storyteller continuing the work her parents began, and beside her, older but unwavering, stood a dog who had never doubted her path. They turned together, descending the dune not in search of treasure, but ready to uncover history wherever it waited. At the end of Emma's journey, the greatest discovery was not hidden beneath sand or sealed behind ancient stone. It was something far simpler and far closer to home. Treasure is not always gold. Sometimes it is courage when you feel alone. Sometimes it is truth when silence would be easier. Sometimes it is loyalty that stands beside you when the world feels uncertain. In everyday life, most of us will never uncover a buried chamber in a pyramid. But we all face moments where we must choose between fear and faith, between hiding and stepping forward. Maybe your storm is not in the desert, maybe it is in your workplace, your family, your school, or your own heart. Emma's story reminds us that even when systems fail, even when doors close, even when people underestimate you, there is still something inside you that no one can take away. Your integrity, your voice, your ability to stand for what is right. And sometimes, like Rex, loyalty and love are the quiet forces that protect us while we find our strength. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that truth matters and that you are not forgotten, I invite you to share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us what your treasure has been in your own life. What helped you stand when everything felt unstable? If you believe that courage and truth still matter in this world, subscribe to the channel and become part of this community. We are building a place where stories are not just entertainment, but reminders that we are stronger than we think. May God bless every person watching this. May He guide your steps when the path feels uncertain. May He protect your family, strengthen your heart, and bring light into every dark season. If you receive that blessing, type Amen in the comments. You are not alone.